In the ever-evolving landscape of Africa's economic journey, the spotlight is firmly on the critical role of robust anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism policies. Strong anti-money laundering frameworks empower institutions to identify suspicious transactions, investigate financial crimes, and bring perpetrators to justice. In essence, they serve as a dam against the tide of illicit financial flows. However, countries like Nigeria, South Africa, Mali, Tanzania, DR Congo, and the likes have struggled to fully implement reforms that deal with financial crimes in their system, and this has perpetuated their presence on the Financial Action Task Force grey list. 2023 has ended and 2024 unfolds. The imperative to fortify the continent's financial systems against the shadows of illicit activities becomes more pronounced. At this juncture, Esteban Gudici, Senior Policy Analyst, Transnational Alliance for Combating Illicit Trade, that is TRACIT, joins me on the show this morning. Happy New Year to you, Esteban. Thank you so much for joining us on Business Edge.
Happy New Year to you and to your audience, Lacan. It's always a pleasure for us to be here with you.
In 2023, some African countries got grey-listed by the FATF with allegations of money laundering and terrorism financing hanging around their necks. Now, which countries most particularly topped the list for 2023, and what were the enablers?
Okay, thanks for that question. Before delving directly into the answer, I would like to stress that we have a report recently released by the African Union that it was done together with the UN Economic Commission for Africa on illicit financial flows, where it is estimated that Africa loses 50 billion a year in illicit financial flows. Now, what does this mean? How these illicit financial flows are generated? Well, the study showcases that they mostly come from laundering criminal proceeds, that can come from drug trafficking, human trafficking, or all types of illicit trade. There is a problem also of corruption related to bribery of public officials or theft or thievery from state assets. There is tax abuse, and there is also market abuse, which is commonly known as the gray economy. All this compounds the problem of the financial situation that the watchdog based here in Paris, the Financial Action Task Force, works with, and these kind of problems clearly manifest in problems of illicit trade and financial flows in general. And what does this mean? That there are problems with the Financial Action Task Force because there are regulatory frameworks that they are not in place or they are not duly implemented. You asked me which are the countries that have been grappling with this in Africa. Well, in Africa, the Financial Action Task Force works with three bodies, which are regional bodies. One is the Eastern and Southern Africa Anti-Money Laundering Group, which comprises, if I'm not wrong, 5 countries which are under the gray listing of the Financial Action Task Force. Some of them that were included in 2023, which are Mozambique, South Africa, we have discussed a lot, and it's a big problem there. We also have South Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda. Then we have another regional body, the second one, which is the Intergovernmental Action Group Against Money Laundering in West Africa, which includes countries like Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Mali, and Senegal, which are subject to the gray listing of the Financial Action Task Force. And last but not least, we have the GABAC, which is its name is in French, which means the group against money laundering in Central Africa. And these days, we have the Democratic Republic of Congo subject to the gray list of the Financial Action Task Force.
Well, I tell you that 50 billion naira in by no measure is a small amount, and that I want to believe would involve serious cases on the continent. Now, we are aware that FATF usually calls on countries to apply countermeasures to protect the international financial system from the ongoing money laundering, terrorist financing, and proliferation financing risks emanating from the country. So which cases, you've mentioned a couple of countries, but then let's look at it cases based. which cases were the most serious in 2023 on the continent, and how effective were the countermeasures that the FATF profiled for these countries?
Well, okay. I think that for us, the most notorious, or at least the ones who received more attention from the public domain, I'm not sure if we can call them the more serious ones, but for sure the most prominent ones in Africa. For us, it has been South Africa, because we have been working a lot in this country, and probably also Nigeria. We have also discussed these cases. Why? Well, you mentioned in your first question that there were allegations of financing of terrorism with different countries. I don't want to get into that because I don't have the evidence, and it's a very sensitive topic, mostly taking into consideration today's geopolitical background. And I mean, there is an ongoing war. There are many things going on. I'm sure that you're aware that by 29 December last year, South Africa lodged a lawsuit against Israel at the ICJ related to the prevention of genocide, the convention. I mean, there are many things going on right now that they are related to everything that has to do with the measures that different bodies and governments are going to take in relation to the financing of terrorism. What I'm trying to say here is that the geopolitical background and arena, it's quite heated, so I don't want to mention any allegation which I'm not certain of.
I understand. I understand. But then if you are considering, of course, if you are considering Nigeria as one of those serious cases, of course, we know that in February 2023, the country adopted a high-level political commitment recommendation to work with FATF and GIABA to strengthen the effectiveness of the anti-money laundering and countering financial terrorism or financing terrorism in the country. Now, is it that these efforts by the government of Nigeria did not actually go down well in terms of due diligence in dealing with issues of terrorism financing in the country? And does that also mean that Nigeria in 2024 might not get out of the FATF's grey list?
Well, what exactly happened? Why there was not enough traction to get out of the gray list? I think, as you mentioned, it is mostly related to what has to do with the due diligence schemes that need to be put forward. And in particular, the Financial Action Task Force mentioned that it was very important to do an in-depth study and to improve everything that has to do with risk-based and target outreach to non-profit organizations, because there is a big risk of terrorist financing when you use this kind of NGOs or this kind of organizations that they are for non-profit. And this is something that the Financial Action Task Force has highlighted in its last release related to this. So I think that there was a momentum that needs to be gained together with all the other efforts that Nigeria has done to be able to get out of the gray list. Now, against all the political background that I mentioned just before this, what's going on in today's world, I think that, there is a possibility that the Nigerian nation is not going to be able to get out of the gray list. But I always like to have a positive outlook on everything. And I must underpin again that there are good practices that come from Nigeria, which has a very good law enforcement tradition. And here I'm always talking about the NAFDAC, the National Agency for Food and Drug Administration and Control, which has displayed some very interesting practices that were taken, for instance, in different forums at the OECD here in Paris, mentioning that this was a very good program, a multi-sectoral program, which basically mirrors what the recommendations of the Financial Action Task Force are in terms of cooperation, interagency cooperation at national level. And this is something that certainly can help to manage to achieve the standards related to non-profit organizations. So yes, from one side, we can say that the country might not get out of the gray list, but from the other side, I can tell you that Nigerian people know how to do this work and they have the capabilities to do it. So let's make it happen. I mean, we can all collaborate with this just bringing the awareness, and I'm sure that the policymakers, they are taking all the things into consideration.
So what about South Africa? You mentioned the Southern African nation a while ago, and according to reports, they got positive reviews in improving on their anti-money laundering and countering financing of terrorism regime in the last few months thereabouts. So for such a nation that is a vanguard in the southern part of the continent, do you think it is pivotal in their actions for them to also get out of that list this year?
Yes, this is pivotal, and I think that it's important to get all relevant stakeholders on the same page with this. I mean, I think that a couple of months ago we discussed this. First Rand CEO had some negative outlooks on what would be the feasibility for South Africa to get out of the gray list. I would take it. I mean, this is a very important person, and it's important the message that he conveyed. But I would be cautious with this kind of manifestations, because South Africa, you know that we have been working a lot with them this last year with the Transnational Alliance to Combat Illicit Trade. And we have seen a very positive response from the policymakers. They are doing their best. And basically what they need to do is mostly related to effective implementations of the regulations that they already have in place. I think it's going to be crucial for the South African, for the southern part of the continent, to have an ally, to have a big player like South Africa getting out of the gray list. And we are working together with the authorities to do this. And I think that the indicators are going to be improved soon. So I'm rather positive with the country, because they are doing, it appears that they are doing what needs to be done. And let's see how 2024 is going to unfold.
Now, Esteban, it has often been argued that being on the Financial Action Task Force grey list does not attract weighty punishment as it's been publicized. How true is that? And what impact does it have on a country's socio-economic well-being? Because the feelers we keep getting is that because of probably the lesser sanctions or the weight incurred as a result of being on this grey list is what fuels the lackadaisical attitudes of African countries in improving on their reforms.
Yeah, I disagree with this statement, because we have reports that show that this is not the case. Let's see, for instance, the International Monetary Fund mentioned, I mean, it has proved it with indicators, that countries which are subject to the FATF grey list suffer an average net loss of 7.6% of capital inflow across their borders. Why is this? Because when you are subject to a grey list like the Financial Action Task Force one, you have problems in terms of reputation, less investment in the country, and the cross-border transactions become more difficult. Now, there are different cases related to different kinds of sanctions and grey listing. Because your question, I mean, I'm going to allow myself to think freely and out of the top of my mind on this. We have seen, for instance, the cases with Russia, with the sanctions from the US when the war started. And many people from the media are arguing that it has not really affected the country. Well, this is something that is quite subjective. But it is true that probably the country has prepared itself to grapple with this kind of sanctions. But now, coming back to the terms of the FATF, I think that this is a different issue, because we are talking here about a country like South Africa, which is part of the BRICS. It's integrated with different parts of the world. And the way in which the country conducts its businesses and the way the population cooperates with all the Western and Eastern world, clearly it affects being subject to the FATF grey list. So because of the things that I just mentioned. But I think that because the country is committed to swiftly identify their deficiencies and to solve them, I think that the outlook is rather positive. But believe me, being subject to the FATF grey list, it makes the country more prone to illicit activities and more prone to poverty. It's something that needs to be tackled, because it's the way to solve the problems that the country can have in terms of poverty, in terms of transparency, and in terms of fighting criminality.
Okay, now when the FATF places a jurisdiction under increased monitoring, it means that the country has committed to resolve swiftly the identified strategic deficiencies within agreed timeframes, and it is subject to increased monitoring. So in 2023, looking at the African countries involved, we have Mali, Sudan, DR Congo, you mentioned Nigeria, South Africa, Tanzania, and some other African countries. Now, did any of these African countries meet their deadlines in sweeping reforms to combat financial crimes in their domain last year?
I think that the best example to answer your question here, and we discussed this recently a couple of months ago, if I'm not wrong, in November, is the case of Uganda. Uganda was subject to the grade listing back in 2020, but in 2023, the plenary, the Financial Action Task Force made the initial determination that Uganda had substantially completed its action plan, and it had warrant an on-site assessment to verify that the implementation of all the measures that need to be implemented would be done at the time during 2024. This means that there was big political commitment, and the key reforms that they have done at Uganda were everything that has to do with improving the strategy, enhancing the tools, pursuing more money laundering investigations, and demonstrating an ability to conduct terrorist financing investigations, among other things. Now, the FATF is continuing to monitor in Uganda in everything that has to do with the non-profit organizations, which is similar to the case of Nigeria, what we have discussed. But the outlook with Uganda is rather positive, and I think that it's a clear example of a country that comply with most of the requirements.
Well, just like Uganda, Esteban, other governments continent-wide are said to be intensifying efforts to combat financial crimes with regional initiatives like Eastern and Southern Africa Anti-Money Laundering Group fostering collaboration and trying to harmonize practices to deal with these issues within their regional domains. So what do you think of such regional groups and their collaborative efforts in tackling financial crimes?
Well, these groups, as I mentioned, they are the groups that work together with the Financial Action Task Force. Here we are talking about the Eastern and Southern Africa Anti-Money Laundering Group. These are crucial to make the Financial Action Task Force work. I mean, the Financial Action Task Force, it's a body, it can be mentioned as an international organization which comprises all the states in the world, thanks to these regional bodies. So for the functioning of the Financial Action Task Force, the existence of these bodies is crucial. What's very interesting and unique from this kind of organization is that the assessments, they are done by peers. It's a peer review between countries that they gather together, and they use these regional bodies to do this kind of studies and monitoring on different countries, and also helping the countries to get out of the problem. Because illicit financial flows are intrinsically transnational and it's an international problem, this needs to exist. And it's the way that the international community has found to grapple with the issues of transnational criminality. And it's the best mechanism that we have up to date. I mean, we are with these international mechanisms, we are trying and we are integrating everything that has to do with technology. And I think it's something that it's very important. I mean, if it wasn't for these bodies, we wouldn't be even aware of the magnitude of the problem. So their existence and their work is crucial. It's critical. It's very important that they are there.
And now, as 2024 unfolds, Mr. Ben, now what are the ways, you've talked about technology anyway, but then what are the other ways that African countries can fortify their financial systems against illicit activities? We know that, as you have said, some African countries have been cautious, and very deliberate in dealing with illicit financial activities in their countries. But then how can they fortify, make solid this system so that they're able to get off the grey list and embargoes placed on them as a result of these allegations and being on the grey list can be taken off their neck?
Well, this I can answer based on my own experience, what could be done. I mean, as you know, I had vast experience in the public sector, both at national and international level. For many years, I worked with UN, with organizations like Interpol. And what I have seen that countries need to do in this current situation, how world is evolving, I think that it's going to be crucial more and more to have private partnership with private partners. Private partners like the organization I work with, the Transnational Alliance to Combat Illicit Trade, or other kind of stakeholders that can be NGOs or that can also be corporations. I mean, the world has dramatically changed. Everything that is regulated by international law and by public policy, it's somehow affected by private corporations or by private entities that need to be taken into consideration and bring into play. We mentioned we are just discussing technology. For instance, the use of blockchain, cryptocurrency for money laundering of these kind of things. These capabilities, they need to come from the private sector, the way to find a way to catalyze the public and the private sector to bring all this expertise, the know-hows, and the resources to be able to tackle the problems. And this is going to help. I mean, there are studies that they are being published right now here in Paris in the Financial Action Task Force that have to do with these problems. And the way to improve these indicators in many different ways can be done with the help of private sector stakeholders. That's why we are always working with national governments, with TRACIT, with the Transnational Alliance to Combat Illicit Trade, to help the countries and to leverage all the capabilities that come from the private sector. I think that this is a main takeaway for me after what has happened over the last years, and taking into consideration how the geopolitics and how the world, I mean the world of affairs, it's evolving throughout the last decade, and that's the outlook that I have for the future. There is going to be a big shift of weight, power, if you want, and relevance from public to private sector, and it doesn't mean that one is going to disappear or one is going to prevail over the other. It means that we have a new player, we have a new non-state actor, which is the private sector, that needs to be taken into consideration and integrated to find effective solutions. And I think that this is a way for Africa.
Of course, we hope that these will be taken into consideration, and for other African countries, they can take a cue from this and try as much as possible not to walk along the fringes of FATF's grey list. Of course, it will be debilitating for the economy. Esteban Gudici, Senior Policy Analyst, Transnational Alliance to Combat Illicit Trade, TRACIT, thank you so much for your time. We wish you all the best in the new year.
Thank you, and likewise to you, Lacan, and to your audience.
Of course.